On a rainy, wind-swept evening in the heart of Newport's prestigious Cliff Walk, a single invitation threatened to upend the glittering Redwood Empire. Inside the gilded halls of their historic mansion, guests gathered for what was meant to be a grand 20th anniversary dinner, only to witness scandal unfold in real time. The wife was radiant and pregnant, the mistress shockingly brazen. Power, greed, and shattered promises collided amid the clink of crystal glasses and hushed whispers. Little did the elite crowd know that by the end of the night, one woman's seat at the table would be taken, and an entire legacy would be forever changed. The Redwood name was synonymous with opulence on America's East Coast. Indeed, the Redwood lineage could be traced back a century. Sailors, merchants, and eventually industrial tycoons who turned old money into a modern empire. Yet for all the Redwood fortune, it was Jonathan Redwood who propelled them into rarefied air. He was tall, with hair once golden, but now elegantly graying, and he possessed the self-assured charisma of a man who believed fate and fortune were his birthright. His beloved estate, the Redwood Manor, perched on a rocky outcrop along Newport's Cliff Walk. The Atlantic Ocean crashed against the stones below a constant roar that served as nature's own cautionary tale. Towers and gables jutted upward from the mansion's rooftop, harking back to Gilded Age extravagance. Inside, marble floors gleamed antique tapestries adorned the walls, and vintage chandeliers cast warm light across salons and ballrooms that had once hosted Vanderbilt's Astors and European nobility. Jonathan Redwood took over the Redwood Empire at the age of 30 after the untimely death of his father in a sailing accident off the coast of Maine. With the help of top-tier attorneys from the real-life law firm Skadden Arps, and with the shrewd guidance of close confidants, Jonathan not only preserved his family's wealth, but magnified it. He owned shares in global shipping lines, had partnerships with tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, and even funded a charitable foundation that named schools in remote corners of the world. At 32, he married Elizabeth Hendricks, a marketing genius from Boston, who'd made her own fortune launching high-end cosmetics. Elizabeth was not just an arm trophy. She was a woman of grit and intellect, holding an MBA from Wharton and working as brand consultant for LVMH before stepping into the Redwood spotlight. With Elizabeth's sense of strategy and Jonathan's relentless ambition, their empire had soared to new heights. Redwood's properties dotted the globe from a private island near Bora Bora to luxurious penthouse apartments in Manhattan, Paris, and Tokyo. Everyone believed they were the perfect couple, glamorous, philanthropic, unstoppable. But behind gilded doors, tensions simmered. Jonathan spent more nights in board meetings than in the Redwood bed. Elizabeth's heartbreak at enduring multiple miscarriages weighed on her. Exhausted from fertility treatments, she quietly began to question whether the Redwood name might end with them. Despite their perfect facade, cracks of loneliness showed in her warm hazel eyes. As the couple approached their 20th wedding anniversary, Elizabeth discovered to her astonishment that she was finally pregnant. A swirl of joy and trepidation filled her heart. She was nearly 40, and a first pregnancy was no small gamble. She needed stability, calm, and reassurance from Jonathan, things that were increasingly absent from his routine. It was precisely in this emotional gap that the seeds of betrayal took root, overshadowing what should have been the happiest chapter in their marriage. Rumors traveled quickly among the mansion's staff. Redwood Manor was a microcosm of drama. Maids, chauffeurs, and household managers who had served multiple Redwood generations learned early on that secrets were not safe for long behind gilded walls. The first hint of trouble came when the longtime housekeeper, Miss Greta O'Connell, saw Jonathan boarding his sleek black Bentley late in the evening. It was 10:30. He had told Elizabeth he was working late with lawyers on a new land deal. Yet the law offices in downtown Newport closed by 9. Confused, Greta peeked out from behind the curtains, watching Jonathan drive off into the night. At first, no one said anything. Jonathan Redwood was a powerful man, one who inspired both admiration and trepidation. People rarely questioned his moves, but week after week the Bentley would vanish in the late hours. Then gossip trickled into the Redwood staff quarters. An elegant brunette had been spotted on Jonathan's arm at a discreet French bistro near the wharf. She was introduced merely as a business associate, but her hand resting on his thigh told another story. Her name was Cassandra Vanderbilt, though no relation to the famed Vanderbilt family. In truth, Cassandra had changed her surname from Jenkins to Vanderbilt upon deciding to create a new glamorous identity. She was half Jonathan's age, perhaps 25 or 26, the exact figure changing with every rumor. Curves in all the right places, a flawless complexion, and an uncanny ability to captivate any man in her presence. Her eyes sparkled with a confident mischief, as though she knew precisely the power she wielded. She had been a rising star in Manhattan's art scene, curating soirees and forging connections with the wealthy. Whispers said she had a track record of seducing older, influential men. No one dared speak of Jonathan's late nights in front of Elizabeth, especially after she finally announced the pregnancy. She had a glow about her, fragile yet radiant believing. At last, her prayers had been answered. The Redwood name would continue. So most of the staff gave her cheerful smiles, kept their lips sealed about any irregularities, and prayed the Redwood marriage would weather any storms. Jonathan was not entirely oblivious to the moral pit he was sliding into. He tried to distance himself from Cassandra, but every time he was about to tell her it's over, her bewitching presence and cunning words lured him back. He convinced himself that Cassandra was just an escape from stress, a trifling dalliance. He told himself, "This is temporary. I'll end it soon." But desire and deception rarely know reason. This ephemeral fling quickly spiraled into something deeper, something Cassandra was determined to wield for her own advancement. Weeks before the Redwood anniversary gala, Elizabeth posted a handwritten invitation on the staff bulletin board. It read, "To all Redwood Manor staff, Jonathan and I invite you to celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary. Dinner, drinks, and dancing in the grand ballroom. Formal attire required." An air of excitement took over the mansion. Party planners were summoned. Florists, bartenders, and caterers from the best establishments in Newport were booked. The Redwood Manor once again teetered on the edge of hosting a legendary event. Elizabeth quietly pulled out all the stops. She wanted to make the celebration memorable, not just for their high society friends, but for Jonathan himself. She had arranged for a live jazz band from Boston, a curated menu from Chef André Bernard, a real-life Michelin star chef who had once cooked for French presidents, and a decadent multi-layer cake designed by the famed New York bakery La Durée. Every detail was meticulously planned to exude refinement. This was to be a night of genuine devotion, a reaffirmation of vows, and a grand display of Redwood might. In her heart, Elizabeth also believed it might be the night Jonathan renewed his commitment wholeheartedly. She wanted him to see how precious their union was, especially now that they would become parents. Perhaps she was clinging to an ideal. Perhaps a small voice inside her recognized the distance in his eyes lately, but she refused to let fear overshadow the chance of salvaging their marriage. Jonathan seemed enthusiastic enough on the surface. He praised her party plans and participated in deciding which high-profile couples to invite, He worked with their real-life PR firm Edelman to ensure the Redwood brand would benefit from the event's coverage. Yet beneath the polished veneer, Jonathan felt trapped. He dreaded the idea that Cassandra might show up or be left out, leading to unpredictable consequences. He had begun to fear Cassandra's powers of persuasion and even her potential blackmail. She had grown too comfortable, throwing around lines like, "I think I deserve to be at that dinner, Jonathan," in a silken voice that clutched at his gut. Against his better judgment, he caved. He sent Cassandra an invitation, albeit with no +1 mention, and no public seat of honor. It was a single, nondescript invitation that read, "Jonathan Redwood requests your presence." Some primal part of him prayed she would be discreet, remain invisible to Elizabeth, or better yet, decide not to come at all. But Cassandra had other plans. Days before the gala, Elizabeth was busy with final logistics when an unsettling exchange took place. She was sitting in the library, her bump gently pressing against the polished oak desk, reviewing the seating chart. The library had floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound volumes, and a large antique Tiffany lamp illuminated her porcelain cheeks. Her gaze was fixed on the names, Hollywood celebrities senators, even old Harvard classmates of Jonathan's. This was going to be the Redwood event of the year, perhaps of the decade. Suddenly a quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Ms. Harriet Stiles, the Redwood personal assistant. Harriet was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, whose loyalty to Elizabeth ran deep. She stepped in hesitantly, her stiff posture betraying some urgency. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I have a concern about the final invitations sent out this week." Elizabeth lifted her eyes, focusing on Harriet's anxious face. "Go on." "Well, I came across a name I've never seen before on our typical guest lists." Harriet cleared her throat. "Cassandra Vanderbilt. I just wanted to be sure this wasn't a mix-up." Elizabeth's heartbeat quickened. Cassandra Vanderbilt. She had never heard the name. That in itself was suspicious, because Elizabeth was intimately familiar with nearly all of Jonathan's associations, if not personally, then at least by mention. She forced a smile. Perhaps she's a new partner in one of Jonathan's ventures. He must have asked you to add her. Harriet nodded, her concern still evident. "Yes, that's what he said. I just wanted to make sure all was in order." "It's fine," Elizabeth replied, a small knot forming in her stomach. "Thank you, Harriet." Her assistant left the room, leaving Elizabeth staring at the name Cassandra Vanderbilt. She wanted to dismiss it as some overlooked detail, but a whisper of doubt lingered. Shrugging it off, she carried on with the arrangements. She was determined not to let paranoia ruin her happiness. On the night of the Redwood anniversary storm, clouds rolled over the Atlantic, painting the sky a deep, moody purple. Bolts of lightning flickered in the distance. Despite the ominous weather, Redwood Manor shimmered. Gold and silver draperies adorned the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, casting glittering patterns on the marble floor. The staff wore freshly pressed uniforms, and the hush of a well-rehearsed routine permeated every corridor. Elizabeth, resplendent in a custom-made midnight blue gown from Dior, descended the winding staircase. Her bump was elegantly accentuated, rather than hidden a statement that she and Jonathan were forging a new legacy. Diamonds sparkled at her wrist, a gift from Jonathan in happier times. Guests turned to watch her, some openly marveling at her radiance. Cameras flashed for those paparazzi given exclusive invites. Jonathan stood at the bottom of the stairs, greeting her with a warm smile that momentarily melted her concerns. He was dressed in a classic black tuxedo, a single white rose pinned to his lapel. In front of the crowd, they exchanged a gentle kiss, timed perfectly for the cameras. For a fleeting moment, they were again the image of a perfect power couple. As the night unfurled, the Redwood guests circulated. Elizabeth introduced her philanthropic friend from Boston, Caroline Mercer, to a Hollywood actor. Jonathan was chatting with an old fraternity brother from Harvard, who was now a U.S. senator. Waiters passed around trays of champagne flutes, while the live band filled the air with sultry jazz. At precisely 8:30 p.m., Cassandra Vanderbilt arrived. She wore a deep red velvet gown that seemed designed to command attention. No coat, despite the chilly drizzle outside, which left droplets shimmering across her exposed shoulders. She held her head high, her glossy raven hair pinned into an artful updo, and a single diamond choker glittered at her neck. Walking up the mansion's front steps, she offered her invitation to the doorman, who blinked twice, but did not dare question her presence. Upon entering, Cassandra made a beeline for the mirror-lined corridor that led to the ballroom. She knew Jonathan would be there, greeting guests and showing off. It took but a moment for her to spot him. That's when a cunning smile curled her lips. Her presence here was no simple courtesy. She had come to stake her claim. In the center of the ballroom stood an ornately decorated table reserved for the Redwood family and their closest friends. At its head were 2 seats for Jonathan and Elizabeth, flanked by seats intended for their immediate circle, key business partners, Elizabeth's dear friend Caroline, and extended family members like Aunt Miriam Redwood. Each nameplate was a decorative piece of gold script on a crisp cream card. Normally, a mistress would remain inconspicuous if they even attended such a function. But Cassandra glided across the marble floor with bold purpose. She scanned the nameplates, ignoring the questioning stares from the staff. Jonathan engrossed in conversation with Senator Milford about a new maritime policy felt a sudden shift of energy. He glanced over and saw Cassandra approaching. For a split second, panic flashed in his eyes. He hoped she would just slip in among the throng. Instead, she walked straight to the Redwood family table and audaciously pulled out a seat next to Jonathan's. In his peripheral vision, Jonathan saw his mother's jaw drop. Elizabeth, returning from greeting a group of charity donors, froze at the sight. Whispers rippled through the crowd as tongues wagged about the unknown woman at the Redwood table. Cassandra's lips curved into a cat-like smile, as though this was the most natural thing in the world. Elizabeth approached from behind, her heart drumming like a war drum. She placed a gentle hand on Cassandra's shoulder, somehow maintaining her composure. "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said evenly, "but this table is reserved for family and close friends. Would you like me to help you find your assigned seat?" Cassandra turned her head, slowly, eyes locking onto Elizabeth's. "Ah, Mrs. Redwood," she said, purring in an impossibly low and rich tone. "Jonathan told me how lovely you are. I do believe he intended for me to sit close by. It's a special night after all." Jonathan, flushing with discomfort, quickly stepped between them. "Cassandra, maybe you want to see if Harriet can arrange another seat for you. There might have been some confusion with the invitations." But Cassandra had no intention of backing down. She arched a brow. "Confusion? That's odd. You personally invited me, Jonathan. Or are you reneging on your promise?" Elizabeth's gaze flickered to her husband, an unspoken question burning in her eyes. Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. Within seconds, the tension at the Redwood table became palpable to all onlookers. An uneasy hush fell around them, as if even the jazz band sensed the unraveling drama. Desperate to save face, Elizabeth inhaled a steadying breath and summoned her gracious hostess smile. No matter, she said, forging a calm she did not feel. We're honored to host all of Jonathan's business partners and esteemed guests. Please stay, she concluded, sounding like a courteous queen, though her heart was twisting in painful suspicion. Cassandra simply settled in, crossing her legs beneath the velvet gown. Thank you, she purred, lifting a champagne flute from the table as though she belonged there. The meal began, but the air grew thick with tension. Waiters served the first course, lobster bisque, garnished with fresh herbs. Conversation was stilted, was all. Elizabeth exchanged nervous smiles with Aunt Miriam Redwood, who whispered, "What is going on?" Meanwhile, Jonathan tried to act as though nothing was amiss, making forced small talk about real estate expansions with an investor from Dubai. Cassandra reveled in her position, leaning closer to Jonathan than any friend or colleague should. She flashed sultry glances whenever Elizabeth looked away. Each time Jonathan attempted to create physical distance, Cassandra found a reason to whisper something in his ear or brush her hand against his. Finally, halfway through the second course, seared scallops in a champagne beurre blanc, Elizabeth could not bear it any longer. She set down her fork, the edges of her composure beginning to fray. "Jonathan, darling, a quick word, please." She stood gracefully, though her knees felt weak. Jonathan nodded, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. Cassandra watched them with an amused smirk as they retreated to a small side corridor. Elizabeth's voice quivered, a lethal mix of heartbreak and anger. "What is she doing here, Jonathan?" He glanced around, ensuring they were out of earshot, then lowered his voice. I invited her. Cassandra is a partner in a new art gallery project. It's complicated." Her eyes narrowed. "Art gallery partner. Then why is she flaunting herself at our family table, sitting closer to you than your own wife? She's someone I know socially. She can be unpredictable." He tried to explain, shoulders sagging under the weight of guilt. "I didn't want to make a scene. I'm sorry." "You didn't want to make a scene." Elizabeth spat, eyes pooling with tears. She refused to let fall. "Jonathan, you're humiliating me in front of our entire world. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" He struggled to meet her gaze. It was never meant to go this far. "I'll handle it. Just go back in there, and I'll talk to her. I promise." "How long?" Elizabeth asked, voice thick with betrayal. "How long has this been happening?" Jonathan opened his mouth, but no words came out. That was enough of an answer. Elizabeth took a step back as though physically stung by his silence. Her face tightened with pain, but she swallowed the tears. Years of grooming for high society events had taught her not to break in public. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her voice shaky, but resolute. "I can't do this right now. We'll talk about it after this event." And with that, she turned on her heel, leaving Jonathan alone in the hallway, drowning in shame. The night was not yet finished. The Redwood wedding anniversary was more than just a private party. It was a well-publicized affair. The Redwood brand had soared to new heights thanks to Jonathan's philanthropic and business acumen. Local media journalists were stationed outside, capturing the arrivals and hoping for a scoop. Inside the final course was served a decadent filet mignon with truffle sauce. Jonathan returned to the table, ignoring Cassandra's provocative grin. Elizabeth composed herself and went through the motions of hostessing, ignoring the glances from concerned friends. Yet the emotional storm churned within her. To top off the drama, when the clock struck 10, Aunt Miriam Redwood stood to offer a traditional family toast in honor of the anniversary. She spoke of Redwood history, their philanthropic achievements, and their bright future, particularly the child Elizabeth carried. Yet as she lifted her glass, her eyes darted nervously toward Cassandra, as if silently acknowledging the intruder. Jonathan and Elizabeth rose together. He wrapped an arm around his wife's waist for the cameras. She forced a smile that, to those who knew her well, did not reach her eyes. The band leader offered a fanfare, and the Redwood couple cut their anniversary cake, posing for photos. Just then the lights flickered. A thunderclap boomed overhead. The storm outside was intensifying. That's when Cassandra took advantage of the hush, stepping forward, as though it were her moment to address the crowd. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, voice carrying through the ballroom. Her presence was as brazen as her arrival. Elizabeth froze, cake knife still in hand. Jonathan nearly choked on a breath. Murmurs rippled among the guests. Cassandra lifted her champagne flute. "To Jonathan Redwood, for his enduring passion, his generosity, and for always keeping his word." She paused, letting the remark hang in the air like a loaded gun. And of course, she continued with a pitying smile aimed at Elizabeth, to the Redwood legacy that will soon expand. Elizabeth's face paled. She found it nearly impossible to breathe as Cassandra turned and stared pointedly at her pregnant belly. Jonathan's mouth opened in silent protest. Journalists exchanged excited glances, sensing a scandal about to erupt. Cassandra lowered her flute. "I'm thrilled we can all celebrate together." She finished, her tone dripping with irony. The tension was unbearable. Elizabeth's mind spun in disbelief. Why was Cassandra making such a public insinuation about always keeping his word and the Redwood legacy? What sort of twisted hold did she have on Jonathan? Then, as if the fates themselves chose to magnify the drama, a powerful bolt of lightning struck just offshore. The mansion lights blinked, and thunder shook the tall windows. In that startling instant, Elizabeth felt faint. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Panicked Jonathan grabbed her arm. "Elizabeth, honey." "I'm fine," she lied, even as the room spun. She needed air and to get far away from Cassandra. So she broke away from Jonathan, stepping carefully past the table, ignoring the flurry of concerned voices. She walked stiffly out of the ballroom and onto the veranda, where the briny wind and cool raindrops brushed her cheeks. Elizabeth stood there, panting softly, tears threatening to spill. She could see the swirling black sea below, illuminated occasionally by flashes of lightning. It felt as though the storm outside mirrored the one raging in her soul. Moments later, Caroline Mercer, Elizabeth's longtime friend, slipped onto the veranda, a shawl shielding her from the wind. "Elizabeth," she whispered, drawing her friend into a hug. "Let's find somewhere quieter. You don't need to stand out here in the storm." Numbly, Elizabeth allowed herself to be guided inside, down a side corridor, into the mansion's music room. A luxurious baby grand piano dominated the space. Walls were lined with vintage records and photos of Redwood family concerts. Caroline locked the door behind them, muffling the din of the party. Seated on a velvet settee, Elizabeth burst into tears. "It's true, isn't it?" she sobbed. "Jonathan is having an affair with that woman." Caroline pressed a tissue into Elizabeth's hand. "I don't have all the details," she confessed, "but the staff has been whispering for weeks." She rubbed Elizabeth's shoulder soothingly. You need to focus on your health, your baby. Elizabeth took a shaky breath, wiping her eyes. I'm humiliated, but I can't just walk away, not with a child on the way. And then, Cassandra. I can't let her waltz in and ruin my family. Anger began to replace Elizabeth's shock, fueling a steely resolve. She had built Redwood's philanthropic brand. She had given her best years to this marriage, endured heartbreak after miscarriage. She refused to lose everything to a scheming mistress. At that moment, the door creaked open. Jonathan stood there, drenched from the storm, hair disheveled. Caroline shot him a furious glare, then stood. "I'll give you two a moment," she said, stepping out of the room. Jonathan approached, kneeling before Elizabeth with palpable remorse in his eyes. "Lizzie," he said, voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I've made the worst mistake of my life." She looked away. "Is it just an affair, or is there more?" He swallowed. It started as an affair, he admitted. I was weak. She offered. Excitement escaped from my stress. I never meant to hurt you. I never intended to humiliate you like this. Elizabeth stared at him, tears still glimmering in her eyes. You should have told me, Jonathan. Instead, you brought her to our anniversary party. How could you? It was never my intention, he insisted, despair thick in his voice. She threatened to show up anyway to cause a bigger scene if I didn't send an official invitation. Fear flickered across his face. She's holding something over me. I put a significant amount of money into her art gallery off the books. If she leaks the truth, it could destroy Redwood's reputation and lead to an IRS investigation. She said if I didn't acknowledge her, she'd reveal everything. Elizabeth let out a bitter laugh. What a fine mess you've created. Off the books, Jonathan. How could you be so reckless? He squeezed his eyes shut, unable to answer. Elizabeth's voice, hardening, asked, Is there more? Are you in love with her? No, he replied quickly, a flash of sincerity in his eyes. She's a cunning opportunist who knows exactly how to manipulate a man. Lizzie, I love you. I want our child, our family more than anything. She stared at him for a long moment, reading his face. Finally, she rose from the settee, chin lifted defiantly. We'll deal with your finances later. Right now, I will not let her humiliate us again. Get her out, Jonathan. Or I will. He nodded. Yes. I'll tell her to leave tonight. I promise you. Back in the ballroom, the jazz band continued to play. Guests tried to salvage the evening sipping champagne and chatting nervously. Many had witnessed Cassandra's brazen toast and Elizabeth's abrupt exit, but they whispered theories rather than openly gossip. Redwood events had never been this scandalous. Jonathan found Cassandra loitering near the dessert table, swirling a flute of champagne. She smiled coyly as he approached. Did I interrupt something? She teased, tilting her head. He grabbed her elbow, steering her away from the crowd. We need to talk, now. Cassandra smirked. Why so serious, darling? I'm asking you to leave, he said in a hushed but firm tone. Don't come near me or my family ever again. She arched a perfect eyebrow. What about my investment, my gallery? The hush money you promised to keep this out of the press. His jaw clenched. I'll honor the arrangement, but you must never set foot here again. She pursed her lips as though considering. Then she leaned closer, trailing a finger down the lapel of his tux. All right. For now. But you'll regret this, Jonathan Redwood. With that, Cassandra sauntered away, hips swaying in her velvet gown. As she exited the mansion, the paparazzi's cameras flashed. She gave them a sultry glance, hopped into a sleek black car, and vanished into the stormy night. The Redwood anniversary dinner continued in uneasy calm. Elizabeth reappeared to thank guests for attending. Polite applause accompanied their departure, though the tension remained thick in the air. By midnight, the mansion was nearly empty. The staff cleared away the remnants of a night that would go down in Redwood history as the scandalous anniversary. Over the next few weeks, Elizabeth's health took a concerning turn. The stress of Jonathan's betrayal had taken its toll on her body. She spent long nights awake, plagued by insomnia, heartburn, and a gnawing sense of insecurity. At her latest prenatal checkup, her doctor noted elevated blood pressure, a dangerous sign for a pregnancy at her age. Jonathan tried to make amends. He was by her side for every doctor's visit, cancelled his traveling engagements, and even set up a small yoga studio in Redwood Manor to help Elizabeth relax. Apologies poured from him daily. On the surface, it seemed he was determined to restore their marriage. And yet the shadow of Cassandra loomed. Legal documents had to be drawn up to ensure she did not leak any compromising financial details. Jonathan wrote her a hefty check to finalize their arrangement. Cassandra's signature released Redwood from potential lawsuits or blackmail. On paper, it was over. But Elizabeth knew better than to trust such matters to a mere contract. Cassandra's cunning might still find new angles of attack. Meanwhile, Elizabeth felt the baby's first fluttering kicks, a miracle she had yearned for her entire marriage. She was determined to protect this child from scandal, heartbreak, and the Redwood family legacy of secrets. Late one night, she combed through genealogical records in the mansion's archives. As the future mother to the Redwood heir, she wanted to understand the estate's lineage. That's when she discovered an old Redwood legal clause. Within the Redwood family trust, dating back generations, there was a stipulation. The Redwood estate shall pass in full title to a legitimate Redwood heir or spouse in the event of paternal misconduct or moral scandal that jeopardizes the estate's rightful continuity. The archaic language stunned her. She read on. In such a circumstance, the Redwood spouse or heir is entitled to assume ownership of the manor and affiliated assets should the Redwood patriarch be found in breach. A cascade of realization flowed through Elizabeth. This was a relic from the Redwood ancestors, designed to protect wives from unscrupulous scions who might squander the family fortune through immoral pursuits. If Jonathan's affair and the hush money came to light, Redwood's board and attorneys could well interpret it as jeopardizing the estate. That meant Elizabeth carrying the true Redwood heir might hold unprecedented power in any internal dispute. Just as Elizabeth contemplated the implications of this old family clause, a phone call rattled her. Caroline Mercer phoned early one morning, voice trembling with urgency. Elizabeth Mercer, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but someone is selling pictures to the tabloids. Elizabeth's heart sank. Pictures of what Caroline hesitated. Jonathan, Cassandra. They were together at a private suite in the Ritz-Carlton, Boston. The paparazzi got them on camera about a month ago. My friend at the Boston Globe said they're hitting the press soon. Elizabeth's head began to spin. The Redwood name was about to be dragged through the mud. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, feeling older and more tired than ever. So Cassandra had not let go. That check Jonathan gave her apparently did not quell her ambition. We'll have to do damage control, Elizabeth said, face set with determination. We can't let Redwood be destroyed. Elizabeth confronted Jonathan with the news. He was furious both at himself and at Cassandra. I wrote her that check. I made her sign the NDA. Damn it all, how is she? He shook his head. She must be funneling the photos through some third party. We need to act fast, Elizabeth said. The Redwood board will be outraged not just by the affair, but the illegal hush money that might come to light. We can't let that scandal overshadow everything you've built. Jonathan paced the length of the grand foyer. But if the pictures hit, it might trigger an internal investigation. The board can vote me out. The Redwood brand will plummet. Our baby's future, Elizabeth lifted her chin. You need to step down temporarily. Transfer the estate title and controlling shares to me until this storm passes. He blinked as though stunned. What you want me to give you, the Redwood estate? Her eyes flashed. Not permanently, Jonathan. But it's the only way to keep Cassandra from sinking us. The press can't destroy Redwood for your scandal if the controlling interest is no longer in your name. He bristled. But Redwood is my birthright. My father. Your father also believed in protecting Redwood from moral scandal, she snapped, recalling the old trust clause. Have you forgotten that it's our child's birthright now, too? He exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. I all right? We'll do it. They called Jonathan's attorneys from Skadden Arps, setting an emergency meeting at Redwood Manor. The attorneys grimly confirmed that the best damage control might be an immediate transfer of assets. Elizabeth Redwood, as the spouse and soon-to-be mother of the Redwood heir, would become the principal caretaker of the estate. Jonathan could remain a figurehead, but would have no official power or signatory authority. It was an extraordinary move, but it might protect Redwood from Cassandra's nuclear bomb of scandal. The next day, in Redwood Manor's wood-panelled study documents, were signed under the watchful eyes of a notary. The Redwood name and estate effectively passed to Elizabeth Redwood. On a crisp morning, just as Elizabeth and the attorneys were finalizing the estate transfer, Harriet, the personal assistant, entered the study, face pale. Ma'am, Cassandra Vanderbilt is here. She says it's urgent. Elizabeth's pulse quickened, but she refused to show fear. Send her in. Cassandra stepped into the study, looking every inch a femme fatale in a tailored black coat and high-heeled boots. She took in the scene piles of legal documents, stern-faced attorneys, and her eyes sparkled with a predatory gleam. Well, isn't this an intriguing gathering? Cassandra quipped, approaching the desk. A power shift, I presume. Elizabeth clasped her hands calmly atop the papers. Is there something you need? Miss Vanderbilt? Cassandra shrugged. I came to collect a second check. You see, those photos are about to go public, and I'd hate for Redwood to suffer even more damage. If you care about your husband, you'll pay me to keep them quiet. A muscle twitched in Elizabeth's jaw, but she kept her composure. We've already paid you. We have a legally binding NDA. Cassandra laughed, the sound echoing off the oak walls. You think I care about your NDA? I have a friend in the tabloids who's hungry for Redwood gossip. Now I have new demands. 50 million, or Redwood's name is toast. Elizabeth bristled. That's extortion. Cassandra's lips curved. No, darling, it's business. Jonathan knows how I operate. One of the attorneys cleared his throat, looking disturbed. Elizabeth raised a palm, signaling him to remain silent. She took a breath, leaning forward slightly. Cassandra, let me be perfectly clear. Jonathan Redwood no longer controls the estate or Redwood Holdings, so your little scheme to squeeze money from him is futile. If you want Redwood funds, you'll have to go through me now. Cassandra's smugness faltered. What Elizabeth opened a folder, extracting a fresh set of documents. I am the sole owner of Redwood Manor and the majority of Redwood Inc. as of this morning. You're free to do what you please with any photos, but Redwood's future and my child's inheritance are secure from your blackmail. You won't ruin us. Fury flashed across Cassandra's face. You can't be serious. Jonathan Redwood is Redwood Inc. Everyone knows that. Elizabeth offered a cool smile. Legally, as of today, he's not. The attorneys nodded in agreement, arms folded. Cassandra's face twisted in anger, and her cunning eyes flicked between Elizabeth and the stoic legal team. Then I'll just release the photos out of spite. Cassandra's sneered voice trembling with rage. Let the Redwood name burn. Elizabeth, carefully controlling her racing heart, fixed Cassandra with a steady gaze. By all means, do it. The Redwood brand will survive. You, however, will face lawsuits for breach of contract defamation and extortion that will leave you penniless. And once the public sees you for what you are, no wealthy benefactor will ever trust you again. Cassandra's shoulders tightened. She recognized the trap. Elizabeth had cornered her. Redwood resources were formidable, an army of attorneys, private investigators, and PR experts who could bury her in legal battles for the rest of her life. You'll regret this, Cassandra spat. Jonathan Redwood won't hide behind you forever. Elizabeth rose to her feet, the faint curve of a triumphant smile on her lips. I'm carrying the Redwood heir, Miss Vanderbilt. He's not hiding behind me. He stands by my side. Now please see yourself out. Cassandra glowered, her perfect features hardened in defeat. She spun on her heel and stormed out, the echo of her angry footsteps trailing through the corridor. 2 days later, the tabloids published a single blurred photo of Jonathan Redwood in a Boston hotel lobby, enough to stir mild gossip, but not the damning set Cassandra had threatened. Redwood's official statement, released by Elizabeth in her new role, explained that Jonathan had been in the city on business. It downplayed any suggestion of scandal. Behind the scenes, Redwood's legal team quietly filed restraining orders against Cassandra, citing her breach of contract and attempted extortion. Cassandra countered with vague threats, but lacking financial resources to mount a major lawsuit. She began to fade into the background. Redwood's attorneys kept vigilant, prepared to strike if she surfaced again. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and Jonathan worked tirelessly to weather the PR storm. Indeed, Redwood's stock dipped briefly, but stabilized once the news cycle churned on to fresh topics. Elizabeth's pregnancy became a focal point. Paparazzi snapped pictures of her shopping for baby clothes at Tiffany & Co. in Manhattan, glowing in the arms of her newly repentant husband. Headlines read, "Redwood family awaits new heir," or "Jonathan Redwood steps down to focus on fatherhood." The Redwood brand emerged battered, yet still afloat. Jonathan's guilt and remorse led him to some soul-searching. He cut ties with old habits, pledged to remain transparent with Elizabeth and to put their child first. But Elizabeth was not naive. Trust was fragile, and though they presented a united front to the world behind closed doors, they navigated heartbreak and fragile hope. For the sake of their unborn child, and perhaps love, Elizabeth gave Jonathan a chance to redeem himself. As her due date approached, Elizabeth decided to hold a quiet baby shower at Redwood Manor. This time, there would be no cameras, no columnists, no press releases. The celebration was intimate, designed not for public perception, but for personal healing. The mansion's grand sunroom, flooded with soft morning light, was adorned with fresh lilacs and pale blue ribbons that fluttered gently in the spring breeze. Jonathan had personally overseen every detail. He was no longer the detached tycoon who once vanished into boardrooms and hotel lobbies. Now he fussed over canapé selections, hand-wrote place cards, and even coordinated with Aunt Miriam on floral arrangements. Caroline Mercer arrived first, bearing a hand-knit blanket she'd spent weeks crafting. A few close friends from Boston followed along with distant cousins and Redwood Manor staff who had become like family. Elizabeth, her figure radiant with late-stage pregnancy, wore a simple ivory silk dress. Her feet were swollen, her back ached, but her smile was genuine for the first time in months. She greeted each guest with warmth, and when Caroline placed a gentle hand on her belly, she laughed through happy tears. The sunroom buzzed with joy as gifts were unwrapped tiny booties, monogrammed bibs, designer swaddles. Aunt Miriam's homemade lemon cake was passed around as she led a game of guessing the baby's birth date. Jonathan hovered near Elizabeth protectively, always ready with a pillow, a glass of water, or a loving hand on her shoulder. His attentiveness didn't erase his past mistakes, but it reminded Elizabeth that perhaps people could change when given a reason big enough to try. Between the laughter and pastel-colored decorations, Elizabeth felt moments of stillness settle over her, like a blessing. Yet even amid celebration, her mind occasionally drifted to the recent chaos, the scandal, the betrayal, the relentless media pressure. She thought of Cassandra still out there somewhere, perhaps scheming anew. Would her child one day learn about the night of the anniversary dinner? About the mistress who tried to rewrite history? But every time doubt crept in, she placed her hand on her belly and remembered this was the future now. This child would carry the Redwood name into a new era, one defined not by scandal or arrogance, but by resilience, integrity, and love. And then on a clear April morning it happened. Elizabeth awoke before dawn, with a steady rhythm pulsing low in her belly. At first she dismissed it as another Braxton Hicks contraction, but within an hour the waves became sharper, more insistent. Jonathan leapt into action, throwing on a sweater and helping her into their waiting car. They drove to Newport Medical Center in silence, hands clasped tightly. Labor was long, exhausting. 12 hours of pushing, breathing, and sweat. But Elizabeth endured, fueled by something deeper than strength, an ancestral will to protect, to deliver a future no mistress could ever steal. When the newborn's cries echoed through the delivery room, time itself seemed to still. A boy, the doctor announced, lifting the swaddled child into Elizabeth's arms. They named him Alexander James Redwood. Tears streamed freely down Jonathan's face as he held his son for the first time. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He's our redemption." Elizabeth, cradling Alexander against her chest, looked toward the rising sun. Through the hospital window the sea shimmered with gold, and waves crashed with the promise of renewal. Despite the wounds still healing between them, this child, this miracle, had transformed everything. The Redwood dynasty had a new beginning, and this time it would be written on Elizabeth's terms. A week after Alexander's birth, Redwood Manor was filled not with scandal, but with the sounds of new life. Soft coos and midnight cries echoed through the marble halls that once held secrets and whispered betrayals. Now they held lullabies and the scent of baby powder. Elizabeth's footsteps were slower, but her presence carried a newfound gravity, no longer just a wife or strategist, but a mother and the legal steward of a dynasty. When they returned from the hospital, the staff lined up in the grand foyer. Each person clutched a small bouquet or handmade gift welcoming the newest Redwood with quiet reverence. At the center of it all stood Elizabeth, dressed in a flowing cream blouse and holding Alexander swaddled in a blanket, stitched with the family crest. Jonathan stood beside her, not as a CEO, not as a disgraced husband, but as a man humbled by fatherhood and the second chance it offered. The manor felt different now, warmer, grounded. Even the ocean outside seemed calmer, its tones no longer threatening but protective. Days later, a formal meeting was convened in the study. The room that had once witnessed Cassandra's schemes now served as the birthplace of Elizabeth's reign. Mahogany shelves towered overhead, the scent of old books mingling with fresh ink from legal documents. Redwood family lawyers, clad in navy suits and measured expressions, sat across from Elizabeth and Jonathan at the long conference table. "We're here to confirm the official transfer of estate authority," said Gerald Donnelly, the lead attorney from Skadden Arps. He slid forward a final set of documents bound in leather. In light of the birth of Alexander James Redwood and pursuant to the Redwood Trust's legacy clause. Mrs. Elizabeth Redwood shall remain the primary holder of the estate's title, with majority control over Redwood Incorporated, until such time as the Redwood Board and family trustees vote otherwise. Elizabeth signed with a firm hand, her signature looping across the page with deliberate grace. As she finished the final stroke, Gerald gave her a respectful nod. "It's done. Redwood's future is now in your hands." Jonathan sat silently beside her, his gaze not on the papers but on Elizabeth. His admiration was evident, tinged with remorse, but rooted in awe. "You've done what I never could," he said quietly. "You saved us." Elizabeth looked up, her eyes cool but not cold. "I protected our son's inheritance and Redwood's name." Outside the study, Aunt Miriam waited with Alexander. When Elizabeth emerged, the older woman handed the baby over her wrinkled hands, gently adjusting his blanket. "The future's watching, dear," she said with a meaningful glance. "Make sure he learns the truth, but also the strength behind it." Later that evening, Elizabeth stood alone on the manor balcony, the baby asleep in her arms. Below, the ocean stretched into darkness, glittering under a rising moon. She rocked Alexander slowly, whispering promises into the wind. "You will inherit more than just land and titles," she murmured. "You'll inherit courage, dignity, and the truth." Jonathan stepped behind her, placing a hesitant hand on her shoulder. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the baby. She paused, then nodded gently, passing Alexander into his arms. As father and son looked at one another under the night sky, something fragile but powerful settled between them. Accountability. A bridge being rebuilt brick by brick, choice by choice. The Redwood estate was no longer just a relic of old money. Under Elizabeth's stewardship, it had become something else entirely, something modern, fierce, and fiercely maternal. The Redwood name had been scarred, but with a matriarch now at its helm, and an heir cradled beneath the stars, it had also been reborn. And so ends the tumultuous tale of how a brazen mistress crashed a sacred anniversary dinner only to be bested by the very wife she sought to eclipse. Beneath the glitter and grandeur of Redwood Manor, a pregnant wife discovered her own power and secured not just her marriage, but the entire Redwood estate. In a whirlwind of scandal, heartbreak, and fierce determination, the Redwood legacy survived and thrived, and while no one can erase the painful lessons learned that night, each sunrise over the cliff walk stands as a reminder. True strength lies in love, commitment, and the unwavering resolve to protect what is rightfully yours. If you found this real-life drama novel as riveting as we did, please show your support. Like this video, share it with friends who love a juicy tale of power and scandal. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories, just like this one.